I heard this thumping twin-cylinder engine motorbike somewhere, going around the lanes near there, and it was one of those shivers down your spines moments. Right, so I did briefly mention it in the previous video where I had this lovely bike with me, and I thought I'd use it as a bit of a prop for this video, or this episode, shall I say. So this is a slight tribute to T. Lawrence, but we had a visit to a place called Clouds Hill, which is where T. Lawrence lived towards the end of his life. And he had the house for actually some time, but we did a visit there, me and Karen, a couple of weeks ago, and a really fascinating place. And I thought I'd share that experience with you. It's not moving images. There's pictures really as I ride this bike along. So I'll be riding this through the episode, and I'll be putting some bits and pieces up so you can see. But Clouds Hill is a really fascinating place. And it's owned by the National Trust. It was donated by the Lawrence family to the National Trust, and I really think it's worth a visit. And you can make a whole day of it by going to the house and the cemetery where he's buried and all the rest of it. That sounds a bit dark and nutty, but it's not. But it's a fascinating place, and I highly recommend you go and see it. So we'll get on the bike, we'll go riding, and I'll tell you the story and the little ghostly bit that happened to me while I was at the church. So come on, let's go and talk about Clouds Hill and T. Lawrence. Right. So here we are on the lovely thumping twin, which is the Norton Commando. And I just thought it'd be really interesting just to use this bike as a bit of a prop, really, and a slight tribute to T. Lawrence, and someone who's so synonymous with biking fans, isn't he? With his patronage at the Rough Superior, which over his lifetime he had 7, I believe, with the 8th, which was an order. Which obviously he never took delivery of because he died at that point. But yeah, T.E. Lawrence, and this all came from this visit that we did to Clouds Hill. Now Clouds Hill was his home, and it became his home because he was then part of the tank regiment, which were based at Bovington in Dorset, and Clouds Hill was his. He started to rent Clouds Hill in 1923 after he was discharged from the RAF and joined the tank regiment. So the Clouds Hill, which is literally barely, the actual tank proving ground is over the back of Clouds Hill, and if you drive not even half a mile down the road, you can actually see the tank proving grounds, which is really, really interesting. And his actual the crash memorial is there, which you can see. That wasn't the actual site of the crash. I think it was on the other side, and I think there is a plaque there, but I couldn't actually find it on the bit. But it's amazing, isn't it, that someone like T. Lawrence will be remembered just as much for his use of Rough Superiors, because by the time he'd rented Clouds Hill in 23, by 1925. He was already on his 5th Brough, so he was probably George Bruffy's best customer, I should think. But he made his name really in history, if you like, for his involvement with the Arab Revolt in 1916, and the capture of Aqaba in 1917, and also the capture of Damascus. So he was already well known as such, but he became a huge, if you like, star of the day with Lowell Thomas's show, which he put on in London, because Lowell Thomas, decided he was going to make this extraordinary man, very private man, a hero, and that's what he became, which is not really something he wanted, to be honest with you. And when he went to Clouds Hill, it was really to separate him from the rest of the world, really, and to live a sort of more reclusive life. The strange thing about Lawrence was that he was so associated, later on, well past his death. We had Lawrence of Arabia came out with Peter O'Toole, and he came back into people's consciousness, and he's always been this sort of mysterious figure that we think we know so much about. Well, we know very little, really, I think, about the real man. But for us motorcyclists, we always think of Lawrence with his bruffs, which he rode around Bovington. And these weren't garage queens by any stretch. He did state that by 1922, or by the time he had his fifth bruff, he'd done over 100,000 miles on those bikes. So they were well used indeed. But what you get from visiting Clouds Hill, which is now run by the National Trust, the house was gifted to the National Trust 2 years after Lawrence's death. And what you see in the house is how it was left the day he died, or certainly the day he crashed, because very sadly he didn't regain consciousness and died several days after the crash. But the house is pretty much as he left it. The only things that were removed from the house, once his family had sort of shut the door, was the books. The books had been removed, and some of the books are now being returned over the years as the National Trust recover some of them. But the house is extraordinary inside, and the pictures you can see now, the leather day bed. He rarely slept there, and when he did, he slept in a sleeping bag, which was made by his neighbour in the house over the road, and he stitched the words into the sleeping bag. But he would sleep on the floor. Extraordinary. There was no cooking. There was no kitchen there. The house was a wreck when he took it on. He rented it originally, and he had to stop all the leaks in the roof. But when he bought the house several years later, he improved it so it was pretty habitable. But he would take guests there, and it's just a really extraordinary and emotional place to go and visit. But you get a sense of how short he was. In the garage, which I'll talk about in a sec, there's a bust of Lawrence, and it's actually, the head height is actually put to how tall he was, and you can see from the picture that he sort of barely comes to my chin. So he was quite a short chap. And when you think of those bruffs being quite big, that was a fair old bike to handle, I should think. So quite interesting that he went for the bruff, even though it's obviously the finest bike at the time and still regarded as the finest motorcycle ever made. One of the gems of the property is the garage. Now, the garage was built in 1930 to Lawrence's specification to house his bruff. What is amazing is that actually on the floor in that garage there's still oil stains, and they are the oil stains from his bikes. And I always think it's really touchy when you see that, because it really brings you closer to the actual person, doesn't it? He'd be there working on his bikes, and it'd be it's a classic British motorbike, they all leak oil, and it's still on the floor. It's not been put there because the house and the garage has been preserved as it was when he left it. What's also interesting about Lawrence is that while living at Clouds Hill, he worked on projects like the Schneider Trophy seaplanes. R.J. Mitchell was working on those projects and designed the Spitfire from those seaplanes. He also was a major contributor to the manufacture of the RB200 rescue boat. which was a very highly regarded piece of kit, and that was to rescue RAF pilots down in the Channel and things like that. And that stayed in production for many years. So he's a really skilled engineer, and a very clever man indeed. On a visit to Cloud Hill, what's really nice is that the tour guides there, which are National Trust employees, they're really knowledgeable about the place and about Lawrence, and they sit you down outside on these benches, and they tell you the story of Cloud Hill and how it came into being, the woodsman's cottage, which became the home of Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence, but he was T.E. Shaw at that point, because he changed his name again, and that's how he wanted to remain pretty anonymous, really. What makes a really interesting day out to this site is you can go from there. If you carry on down the road past Clouds Hill, you can go to the Crash Memorial, which is probably, or I don't know, not even half a mile down the road. You turn off where you can view the tanks, which are quite often testing there, and there's a memorial there. The actual crash site isn't there, strangely. It's apparently on the other side of the road, so one of the tour guides told us. But you're in that site. If you watch the film Lawrence of Arabia, you'll see in that film loads of gorse bushes, and that area is covered in gorse. And I'm not sure whether they actually filmed the recreation of the crash there, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did. What you can then do from there, you do a little bit of a circuit, and it's a really nice ride, actually. So I'd highly recommend that. You can go to the St Nicholas Church at Norton. Now that's where the church service was. It wasn't where the memorial was, because that's St Paul's. But if you go to St Nicholas Church, Norton, that's where the funeral service took place. Now this is where the eerie part took place. Now I thought at the time that his grave was actually in the churchyard there, because there's a churchyard, and it's a lovely little church, as you can see. But it was at that point, when I was standing there on my own, just looking around the grounds of the church, that I heard this thumping twin-cylinder engine motorbike somewhere, going around the lanes near there, and it was one of those shivers down your spines moments. We thought, oh, that's what am I listening to there? I couldn't hear anything else other than this dum 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 dum. And it didn't sound like a Harley. It sounded like an old British twin, and it wasn't creepy. It was sort of like, I just felt it was someone telling me something. That's all I can say about it, really. But what it made me do, it made me look at there's a poster in a display cabinet at the church, and he's actually buried at the cemetery round the corner. So it's a very nondescript little cemetery. It's at the side of the road. There's a little white gated entrance, and you go in there and you go to the end of the path, and you have to look for it. It's not easy to, it's not completely obvious. And there is the grave. And what's interesting about the grave, and it's something that the tour guy said to us, is that he didn't want the Lawrence name. That wasn't his original name. His parents changed their name to Lawrence, and the life he had with his parents was very difficult, and he changed his name to Shaw, and they believed that that was a sort of last insult, really, to his memory, really, from his parents, and particularly his mother, that they didn't put Shaw on the gravestone, they put Lawrence. But that's just one of the things we'll never really probably truly understand. But what's nice, there's a wooden cross by the tree, and you think probably that's what he would have approved of. But that thumping twin-cylinder engine around there, to my mind, to me, and it made it quite emotional going to that grave, and became more poignant just being at the graveside, and I could hear that twin still echoing in my head. So I highly recommend going to Clouds Hill. I think it's a fascinating place, a really fascinating place, and you really get a sense of the person. And what I would suggest people do is watch the film first. Watch Lawrence of Arabia, because there's a lot in there. Of course, it's overly dramatised and all the rest of it, but there's a lot of truth in that film. And he he had a very difficult life, a fascinating life, but some very difficult moments in it. And do your research on Lawrence, and then go to Clouds Hill, and I think it'll bring it far more to life for you, because it's a fascinating place. It's only about, I think, £11, I think it is, to do. It's worth pre-booking, but going on the bike would be great. You'll be very welcomed on a bike there, because the tour people understand that, and it's not a homage. It's not like that. It's more than that. It's not a place where just lots of tourists go just to gloat or gawp. You get a real sense of the person and who he was, and I highly recommend it. So there you are. I've enjoyed flying around on the Norton today, and I hope you just enjoyed that little insight, really. So I thought I'd leave the last word to the great man himself, and a quote from his 7 Pillars of Wisdom book, which he wrote about his exploits in Arabia. All men dream, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake in the day to find that it was all just vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous men, for they may act on their dreams with open eye to make them possible. How that seems to echo at the moment. Right, take care everybody. Look after yourselves and ride safe. See you in the next episode.